Good evening, folks. Thanks for coming in. Hope you're all safe and well, and welcome to our first live of 2025. We had planned to go live, but with stuff happening, but now we're finally live. And what better way to start? I hope everybody had a great Christmas, New Year. I know it seems months away now, but you know, you've got to say that. But I hope everybody had a nice Christmas and New Year. You know what I mean? There's Sarah watching for the next room.
Hi, Sarah.
What better way to start off our first live of the year with this lovely lady? There's wee Eileen in. Eileen is from Phantom Seekers Paranormal. Lovely little lady. We've got Tracey in. Now, you might remember Tracey from last year with Barrie, John and Gaz Creswell, and Tracey mysteriously popped up. I don't know why.
I gate crashed the party.
She gate crashed the party, which is a thing I hear she does quite a wee bit when she's got a wee bottle of gin tucked in her pocket and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? But it's good to have you to myself. That sounds bad, doesn't it?
Well, we can get a word in now, can't we?
Aye, Barrie and John, get a billion guys. Geez, Barrie can talk, can't he?
He can talk, bless his heart.
Barrie can talk. So just quickly, how are you, dear?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. I'm really good. Yeah. Had a nice weekend. It's Sunday night.
You're looking very tanned.
I am looking really brown in this light, aren't I? I can assure you I'm not. I'm very pale normally, but I think it's just the light and whatever. It makes me look like I've been on holiday.
It does, whereas I just look Scottish. Basically, you know, I think we're usually kind of, as Billy Connolly says, a pale blue colour. You know, and then we turn white, you know what I mean? But anyway, so Tracey and I are big fans of the Tudor era, as is Sarah as well, obviously. So we thought we're going to do some shows and we're going to be talking about the Tudors, basically.
Yeah.
Pale and interesting. Well, thanks very much.
Is that me or you?
I've never been called pale and interesting before, so that's a first. I'm going to write that down, Eileen. I'm keeping that. Thanks very much, though.
Title.
I'm pale and interesting.
You are.
No, I'm just Scottish, actually, aren't I? So where was I? So we're going to be talking about Henry VIII and his reign, you know, bits and bobs that attached to him. And we're going to be talking about all his wives. Now, we've covered the Tudors a few times in posts and lives, but we've not done it for a long time. But Tracey's a big fan of the Tudor era, so we thought, why not just do some shows on it?
I think a lot of people are, aren't they?
I think it's one subject that never gets boring.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, people like the Tudors, don't they?
And I think, you know, I mean, there's been many, many monarchs, no disrespect to it, but I think Henry VIII is one that really stands out in history. You know, he's obviously with Queen Elizabeth, who passed us a couple of years ago. She's the longest reigning monarch, but I think Henry VIII had such a big impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was so many branches to his tree, basically. You know, there's so much happened in his lifetime and his wife's and political, religion. It's like, boom, it's like that, you know. I mean, Henry was born, just a quick thing about Henry, he was born 1491 in Greenwich Palace. He was the son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. He was one of, some of my details might be wrong, because I've not covered this for a while, 6 or 7 siblings. 3 of them survived, and Henry. It was Henry, Arthur, Mary, and Margaret. They survived. The other ones didn't survive infancy. His brother Arthur, who was first born, was heir to the throne, basically. So Henry, he wasn't so much put aside, but there was more focus on Arthur by his father.
Yeah.
Because he was being schooled in how to be the future king. Henry was still looked after. He was very, very well educated in all different subjects, languages, etc. And then Arthur died unexpectedly. Arthur married, I'm going to get us back to front, aren't I? Probably. Arthur married Catherine of Aragon,
That's
who
right.
was a Spanish princess, and this was more like a political marriage. It was to strengthen, basically, England bond with Spain, because England was under threat from France. France weren't too friendly with England at the time. So we think that England saw this, marry a Spanish princess, we've got all them on our side, basically. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tracey. I might be getting this wrong. I don't know.
No, you're not getting it wrong.
This is just,
well. You're doing well.
This is just off the top of my head. Arthur died unexpectedly in 1502, round about the age of 15, 16, from what they called the sickness, sweating flu, it was. So that thrust Henry into the limelight. He was kind of brought out, and his father, Henry VII, had to basically start again. There's Craig Laura's other half. Hey, young man.
Hello, Craig.
So Henry was now heir to the throne. His father, Henry VII, had to start all over again, start from scratch, basically. And Henry became king in 1509.
That's right.
He was crowned king.
At the age of 17. He was only 17 as well.
He was only 17 when he was crowned. His mother died, Elizabeth of York. His mother died 2 years after Arthur, in 1511. France is not much friendlier now. I've not been in France in a long time. And also when Henry VII died, Henry became king. There was a lot of dispute over whether the Tudors were the rightful heirs to the throne, basically. There was a lot of controversy. A lot of people felt that they were more entitled to be sitting on the throne than the Tudors. One reason was because Henry VII was not born of royal blood. He took the title from Elizabeth of York, and he more or less named himself king. Is that right?
That's right. And they also really stopped the War of the Roses, didn't they? Because Elizabeth of York, and he was from the Lancaster house, and they merged together, didn't they? So that kind of stopped the War of the Roses. So that was a really big sort of coming together of a marriage that settled a lot of wars and disagreements. And in fact, the Tudor rose came from that, didn't it? The Tudor rose came from the Lancaster rose and the white York rose. They merged them together, and that formed the famous, now we know, the Tudor rose. Lovely to see you again as well.
Good evening, Tarrant. She can't even spell Tarrant, Tarrant Tracey.
I prefer that.
Lovely to see you again. Good evening, boss. Not saw you in 7 hours. So missing. Aye, okay. There's not been 7 hours, has it? Less than 7, more than 7 hours. But anyway, that's Craig's other half. Aye, so now you've got Henry. His father passes away. Henry's 17. He's now married to Catherine of Aragon. I think the main reason he was pressured into marrying her to maintain this political tie between England and Spain. So you've got a young 17-year-old boy who is well educated. He's now in charge. Yeah,
absolutely. And in fact, before the coronation, him and Catherine were married, and obviously she was married to Arthur, as you say, his late brother. But they kind of, because it was the Catholic faith and the Catholic Church, they kind of denounced the fact that she had ever had a relationship with Arthur, so that she could actually, even though she was a widow, that she could marry Henry. And for the reasons that you've just said, to keep the peace with those two countries, to have Spain on side was really, really important. So a lot of the Tudor marriages were for political reasons, weren't they? Merging the countries and keeping the countries happy. And in fact, Henry's two sisters, so Margaret married a Scottish prince, and Mary married a French prince, so also keeping the peace with those countries as well. So all of these sort of Tudor marriages were based around political reasons, really, weren't they?
They were. I think it was very, very rare for, you know, a marriage to be out of love, basically. Right, you know. It was all, I mean, we've all watched things on the Tudors, you know, we watched the Tudor series as well, which I thought was really, really good. But I mean, they were betrothed when they were like 2 or 3 years old.
Oh, I know, it's crazy, wasn't it? Absolutely crazy.
You know, there's one bit in the Tudor, I think it's Mary. She's about 3 years old and she's betrothed to this other boy who's about 10, 15 years older than her, you know. And I think the age then to get married was 12.
Madness.
You know, so she still had about 9 years to go. But that was her. That was her life was, you know, dictated to her. You will. But it turned out she never married him. But a lot of it was religious and political, as you say, Tracey. Religion played a major, and we see this later on in Henry's life, in Henry's reign.
But in his younger years, he was a practicing Catholic. You know, he used to go to mass. I think it was daily mass that they used to go to. So he was very much brought up with the Catholic religion. So it's very sad, as we know what happened later on in his life, because he was brought up with that lovely Catholic faith, wasn't he? So that's, you know, it's quite sad, really.
Breeding programs and what? You need to explain that one to I don't have a clue what that is. So sorry, Eileen.
Not real marriage, no. Basically, a political union, wasn't it? Absolutely, a political union.
All right, not real marriages. No, is that on 10 to Cordy? I think it's going to change it. Cordier. No offence, Eileen. Stop using fancy words.
She gone a little bit Latin there.
Is that what that is? Is that what it is, Latin? And when Henry came to the throne, he promised. I think it was I think very, very early. I know later on in his reign, he became. People say he became a bit of a tyrant and all the rest of it, which we'll get into in the future. But I think there was two sides to Henry as soon as he became king, because he promised his people, you know, I'm going to be a good king. You know, the country's going to prosper. You know, you're all going to be okay. But there was the other side of him that I felt he felt he had to prove himself. Marriages.
Interestingly, absolutely. Political convenience and well, I don't know about harmony, but harmony between countries, certainly. But yeah, it was really interesting, wasn't it? The fact that the big Catholic thing, the big breakaway, because that was how he was brought up. So
and about 2 weeks after he was crowned king, he had two of his father's closest advisors.
That was
I can't remember their names off the top of my head.
They weren't popular, were they?
They weren't popular, so he had them arrested and executed, basically. And I think that was, this is just my opinion, I think that was his way of showing people, look, I'll be a good king, but don't mess around with me.
But also, he gained popularity with his subjects by doing that, because they were quite corrupt advisors. So by having those two advisors of his father's executed, he immediately gained sort of notoriety for that. And they sort of thought he's going to be a good guy. And instead of having a privy council that was full of noblemen, he went for sort of, you know, the basic peasants that were you know, like, for instance, Cardinal Wolsey was a butcher's son. Thomas Cromwell was a blacksmith's son. So he wanted to do things very, very differently. So he was very, very popular to start with.
It was. I'm glad you brought up Wolsey, because he played a major part. And quite a bit. And as you said, you mentioned the Privy Council. A lot of people hated Wolsey. Because basically, you say he was the son of a butcher, so he wasn't born into royalty or titles or anything like that. He was just a son of a common butcher. but he became Henry's right-hand man. Let's face it, he became the second most powerful man in the country.
Yeah.
And this upset a lot of people.
Mm.
Yeah. And as you say, Cromwell as well. Wolsey took on Cromwell. As you say, he was the son of a blacksmith.
That's
so
right.
Another commoner, basically.
Yeah.
And
so Wolsey he kind of moulded him, didn't he? He kind of looked after Cromwell.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not knowing the future that lay ahead.
Aye, there was quite a rocky future still to come, as we sort of very well know.
Yeah.
But see, the Privy Council, they hated Wolsey for the two reasons. He wasn't, as far as they were concerned, he wasn't entitled to hold the position that he did.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were jealous because he had the king's ear. He was the only one who could go straight to the king. And the king would listen to, basically. And I think Henry kind of gave him free rein, you know, to do what I'd say to do what he wanted, you know, without, as long as it met Henry's approval.
Yeah. Which it did for a long time, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It did for a long time, but the problem was when obviously he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon and break away from the Catholic Church, and Wolsey couldn't help him do that because of his religious faith and beliefs. So that's when there was the huge falling out, and Wolsey sort of fell out of favour, didn't he?
He tried for 2 years to get the Pope to grant a divorce. And the Pope was having none of it. And that's when, as you said, Wolsey started to kind of fall for grace a wee bit and started to panic. Because let's face it, Tracey, you know, with Henry's court, you never knew from one day to the next if you were going to be alive. That's how fragile it was.
It was very brutal times, wasn't it? Very brutal.
It was really, really brutal. But you see, that's how fragile the court was, because you never knew if the king was going to fall out with you.
No, exactly.
You know.
But we're talking about quite a long way into his reign, because he was married to Catherine of Aragon for 24 years. And it wasn't until the 20th year that Anne Boleyn caught his eye, and she refused to be his mistress, which is why he became slightly obsessed with her and really wanted her. And that's why he wanted the divorce. So it was quite a long way into his reign. So Wolsey worked with him for a long time. Everything was fairly harmonious to start with. But then it all started to turn a little bit bitter, because Henry was a very intelligent man, as we know. He was very well-rounded. He was a real good sportsman, a fantastic athlete, and incredibly intelligent. But he was, I think, manipulated by the people in his Privy Council, because they were all trying to be the top person. They were all trying to outdo one another. They were all trying to stay on side. None of them really trusted each other, did they? And like you say, there were a lot of jealousies, so they didn't like Wolsey. They didn't sort of warm to him at all. But he was around for a long time before it
He
all
was around for over 2 decades. We're just back to the Privy Council. I mean, it was, as you say, you know, a lot of them didn't like each other. Everybody wanted to be the top dog. You know, they wanted to be noticed by the king, because this was the main thing.
Yeah.
You know, I want to be Henry's best pal, basically. And, you know, look, Your Majesty, what I've did. And I think the slightest chance he would get of sticking a knife in to somebody else, who would take it.
Yeah, absolutely, they would. Absolutely.
And a lot of the time, Henry, to start with, Henry was quite a laid-back king. He didn't really take a lot of interest in the running of his country.
No, he was very sporty, wasn't he?
He was more
very sporty.
He was more interested in, you know, going hunting or jousting or whatever sport, and he would delegate to a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, well, you do this, you take care of that, you do this. I'm off to hunt deer, or you know, whatever the case.
We always see portraits of Henry, don't we, where he's older and he's bigger, and obviously he got really fat, didn't he? However, he was incredibly good looking. He was a slim, athletic 17-year-old when he came, you know, into power. 6'2", blue eyes, you know, very muscular. He's a really handsome chap, but we never really think of that side of him, and we never see that side of him because we kind of know him for the brutality that he carried out to his wives predominantly, and several members of his Privy Council. And we just remember him getting big and fat. And, you know, he was only 55 when he died. We think of him as being a really old age, but he wasn't an old age. He was 55. And apparently he used to eat 5,000 calories per day, which is double the amount a normal man should eat. So he started off this really slim, attractive, fit, athletic king. And he just really loved feasting and hosting and holding parties. And he just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And yeah, his suits had to be specially made. His armour had to be specially made. And even later on in life, his Privy Council members and people close to him wore padded clothing to kind of match his size so that he didn't look out of place. So it's quite fascinating, isn't it, to think how he started off and then how he sort of declined.
Because when people talk about Henry VIII, I mean, there's that famous painting by Holbein, you know, where he's standing up and he's got all his stuff, you know, all his clothes on, all his, and all his finery. Aye, that's a grandeur. I was going to say, you know, but we'll go with finery. I think that's the image that everybody's got, and you were right. He did when he passed away. He was some size. I don't know if you've been at the Tower of London or not.
I have, yeah, a long time ago. I went to the Tower of London.
When you get in and you see the suits of armour,
yeah,
you know, you've got one when he was a younger man sort of thing, and it's kind of slim sort of thing.
Yeah, really tiny,
and then
really, isn't it?
You've got the next, the sort of end one, his last one, and you can see exactly what can I see? You have a rough idea of what size he was then. And see when he had to be hoisted onto his horse and all the rest of it near the end.
Yeah, that's
because it was just so big. But I mean, as you say, he was constantly eating, parties, drinking, all the rest of it, and it didn't do him any favours health wise. You know, his armour is really interesting.
Yeah. I don't remember. I have to be honest. I don't remember so much his armour at the Tower of London. I remember queuing to see obviously the crown jewels and things. So I don't remember so much the armour, but I know over the years, obviously, it had to be specially made and everything had to be adjusted and accommodated for him because he was so large. Yeah.
It was the armour was. I mean, the Tower of London. I've been there 3 times. It's fascinating, but
yeah,
it was the armour that caught my eye when I saw one and. You know, and then I saw the other one. I thought, Jesus, look at the difference. I mean, we all put on a wee bit of poundage, you know, but that guy was huge.
Yeah.
Near the end. But just get back. We mentioned Anne Boleyn. We mentioned, you know, Wolsey. Wolsey built Hampton Court Palace, magnificent building. You know, Wolsey wanted the biggest and the best palace in Britain, basically, which he succeeded in getting. And when Anne Boleyn came on the scene and Wolsey saw himself sort of failing in the eyes of the king, he decided to gift it to Henry. In an attempt to sort of save his own neck. Yeah. Which we know didn't really work. I think by the time Anne came along, Hampton is beautiful, it's massive, but
absolutely. I have been there, it is beautiful.
I love it. Seeing you standing in the archway just before you get into the sort of courtyard and what have you, and you think all the people that passed under that archway and stuff like that, it's just so unbelievable.
Yeah.
Aye, what was I saying? I've lost track. Aye, so Wolsey gifts Hampton Court Palace to the king to try and save his own neck, which worked for a short time. But then I think the Privy Council were wanting rid of him. By this time, Anne Boleyn was on the scene. And Anne's sister, Margaret, I think it was it Margaret or Mary?
Jane, I think.
She'd already been Henry's mistress.
Yeah.
But Henry had got tired there, basically, and dumped her. And I think Anne, because Anne ended up a lady in waiting to Catherine of Aragon.
That's right. That's how she caught his notice. Yeah.
And this is how. But I think Anne, I know in the Tudors it portrays this, you know, with George Boleyn, her father. He wanted Anne to catch the king's eye.
Yeah.
Because he was quite career motivated. He wanted to rise, you know.
Yeah.
And but one thing I have forgotten about was how paranoid Henry was at the start. I think that kind of remained with him through his reign. But in the first few years of his reign, I mean, the Duke of Buckingham that he had executed, because the Duke of Buckingham thought he'd more claim to the throne, and he was attending to put an army together. Henry got wind of this and had them, you know, off-ski. And I think a few of them went that way. I forgot to mention that, actually. I think that put a lot of people off trying to take over the throne.
Yeah, he kind of warned them.
Yeah. Buckingham was seen as a kind of warning, you know, this is what's going to happen to you if you try to take my throne away from me. So there's just that much to this guy's life. You don't know. There's that many different...
And so many potential enemies as well, you know, from Scotland to France to Spain, which is why those political marriages happened to try and keep the peace. Because at the end of the day, his reign was to reign over England and to keep the peace. And then eventually, obviously, he became head of the church. But it was also to produce an heir. And this was the ongoing battle for him, wasn't it? And probably himself, I should imagine Henry was the one that had the problem, because throughout all of his wives, so many of them had miscarriages and stillbirths. And he produced really good female heirs, but he couldn't produce a really good son. And the love of his life, his third wife, Jane Seymour, who we believe he truly loved, obviously did produce him a male son, but he was very sickly and poorly. And he died at the age of 15. So although he took over the reign briefly when Henry died, he didn't last very long himself. So I think he went through the wives because he was desperately trying to produce a male heir to continue on the reign, which he really struggled to do. So,
because it was a common filing I put on reset, because it was a big thing back then, a male heir.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, this was, I think it was also a sign of, you know, a sort of manhood sort of thing. If you could produce a son who was strong and tough and who could take over where you left off, you know, when the time came, it was a major thing, and it was a really major thing to Henry.
Yeah, he didn't want to, you know, nobody wanted a female heir. They wanted to produce a male heir. That was the security of the throne, wasn't it? So,
I mean, he by Lady Fitzgerald, I think it was. That's been how I should have looked this up, so I do apologise. But he was recognised as an heir to the throne because he was born with an affair, basically. Who'd want to be part of the royal court 10 years after the tower?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what we were saying earlier on. You know, you just didn't know.
No. At the start, I think it was like one big party. It was one big party, one big celebration. But as he got older and as time went on, and like you say, he was very paranoid, struggling to produce an heir to the throne. So it was becoming real pressure for him. Broke away from the Catholic faith and became head of the church. So he then gained new enemies. I mean, it was a very turbulent time for him, really. He couldn't seem to do anything right. You know, it started off with such good intentions, but then it kind of all went a bit pear-shaped for him, really, didn't it?
I kind of built up, as you say, you know, you'd Anne Boleyn, you'd Catherine of Aragon, he could not get a divorce. So,
yeah, this is when Wolsey was in trouble, wasn't it? Right, I lasted a whole 30 minutes. All right. Okay, see you soon. she's off, is she? See you soon, Laura.
It's a running joke with Laura. She's watching the Missing. She's addicted to it, basically.
Oh, right.
So we were joking earlier on about it. You know, I'll talk to you later, dear. No, I've lost the place. I've lost the place again.
So we were just talking about how it started off as one big party, and then obviously it got a little bit more intense as it went along. But one classic celebration was probably one that most people know of in 1520, was the Field of the Cloth of Gold. And this is where King Henry and the King of France were celebrating their sort of union, their friendship, and it was a huge celebration. And it took 6,000 men 3 months to build a temporary palace for Henry VIII and all of his entourage to hold this particular event. 5,000 English people attended, and they had a feast, they had parties, they had jousting, they had 17,000 conger eels, they had 2,200 sheep. This is obviously to feast on because there were so many people, and it was really just to celebrate the friendship of the English and the French, again, because they were so paranoid. They wanted to make sure that publicly they were known to be on side with each other. So they had this massive celebration, which was called the Field of the Cloth of Gold, which is quite famous. But yeah, 6,000 men, 3 months to build a temporary palace, which apparently was huge and not dissimilar to one of his many palaces. And he had 60 homes and palaces altogether. And he used to travel between the palaces, as you probably know, Scott, because he would be very paranoid about any diseases, any illnesses, so that if there was anything seen to be creeping up in one area, he would disappear off to another area, to another house, to another palace. Also, when he was away, the palaces would get cleaned. So he had so many homes to go in between. You know, it was just such a massive entourage that went with him as well. So for this Field of the Cloth of Gold, it was doing this massive palace to replicate one of the houses that he already had. So it was on such a huge scale, and it went on for days and days. I can't quite remember how long it went on for, but it went on for days and days, hence the huge amount of animals that they had there to sort of feast on.
You said it's 60 houses, you know, 60 palaces, whatever you want to call them. And it's just the whole size of the operation. I've watched a few things in Hampton Court and about the kitchens and all the behind the scenes at Hampton Court. It was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the kitchens were always on the go, blah, 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 you know. And you think, how much would it have cost to run all these palaces?
I know. And they used to eat, you know, when he was in his normal palaces, if you want to call them that, they used to eat swan, they used to eat porpoise. And this is why he got so big, because they feasted on so much meat. But apparently they would also have jelly and custard and cream. Those were like the main sweet treats. So it was all about feasting and partying and, you know, later on in life as well. So this is why his waistline just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
That's all that basically all they done was party.
Yeah.
You know, as I said their own.
That's it.
As long as the country was running all right, he had all these people to do his bidding in all different departments. And I just saw a flashing light outside. He had all these people to do, you know, all his jobs for him, basically. Yeah. And he was all interested in partying.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, you know, after Wolsey, you know, obviously Wolsey was arrested. There's two different stories. We're not exactly sure how Wolsey died.
No, I mean, he's always portrayed as dying in his bed, isn't he? Dying asleep, because Henry had intended to have him executed, but he never got to execute him because he did die. So, yeah.
I mean, some people say he died natural causes, in his sleep. Other people are saying that he committed suicide rather than face the headsman, rather than face the scaffold, and not just face the axe, but face the sort of dignity of what he once was, to him being led onto the scaffold and executed. Rather than face that shame, basically, he decided to do the job himself. But we don't know,
Interesting. So yeah, we'll never truly know, will we? Really, but that is an interesting thought, isn't it?
Aye, did they say, was it a cover up? Did they say that he died in his sleep to save him the embarrassment? Well, he done himself in, basically. Rather than say that, they said, well, he died in his sleep. It stopped people asking questions.
Amazing, really, isn't it?
The throne was depostic back in the day. Right, I'm going to appear stupid here. I've not got a clue what that word means. I mean, everybody watches your shows knows I'm thick, but depostic.
Back in the day. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what depostic means. Despotic. I'll have to look that up. Not here.
Eileen's coming out with these fancy words, isn't it?
She is, isn't she? Perhaps she's gone back to the Tudor times. She's using.
And she's confusing the hell out of me, But so Wales is out the road. Henry decides, I'm going to leave the Catholic Church. I'm going to make my own church.
So we've gone to 1534 now, where this has all started. Absolutely, so he's been with Catherine, hasn't he, for 20 years? Wants to break away from her. So this is a really big deal. This is what changes the course of history, doesn't it?
It does. We did a show last year with Penny Morgan, and we called it What If? And the basis of the show was certain things that have happened.
Yeah.
The king was all powerful in his words when, thanks, Eileen, Doc. Basically, that's how it was, The king said something, you didn't ask questions, you didn't quit, you just did it, and that was it.
Yeah.
So we did a show with Penny Morgan last year. We said, what if? And it was we picked 4 or 5 different big things in history that happened. And the whole idea was, what if these never happened?
Yeah.
And one was if Henry hadn't broke away, if Henry hadn't met Anne Boleyn, would he still have broke away for the church? And because it's amazing. You get Catholics and Protestants, and I'm from Glasgow, and it's a big thing with Rangers and Celtic and all the rest of it. And, Catholics hate the Protestants. I'm no either way. I'm not into all that stuff. But I've asked a couple of people, do you know how Catholics and Protestants came about? You're a big Rangers fan. Do you know how it came about? No. It's religion. And see if you tell them it stems back to Henry VIII. All because they're a young woman. They think you just kicked them in the face, basically. They really don't have a clue. So that's what we were asking. We thought, if he hadn't met Anne Boleyn, would he still have broke away for the church? Would you have Catholics and Protestants?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if he hadn't met Anne Boleyn, he was still desperate to have a male heir. So it could well have been just the next one in line, which happened to be James Seymour. It's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult to say that for sure. But I think if it hadn't been Anne Boleyn, it would have been somebody else, because he proved that having 6 wives, didn't he?
But you see, I think Anne Boleyn, no disrespect to his other wives, we're obviously in future show we're going to get and teaching every one of them. But it would have been very different now if Catholicism had continued. I think it would have been very different if it had carried on. But I mean, see, no disrespect to 6 wives. They're all remarkable ladies of left their own slab in history, basically, which we will go into in the future. But I think Anne Boleyn, I don't know what it was. He went to so much. I mean, let's face it, he was the King of England. He could have had any woman he wanted. He tried for 2 years, and Anne was quite strong-willed, and she basically told him, if you want me in your bed, you have to make me your queen.
That's
Which
right.
is,
Be his
you know,
mistress. Yeah.
which probably he'd never heard, nobody'd ever dare say that to him before. But
No.
Anne stood up to him and says, this is the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think for the King of England to pursue this woman for over 2 years and then to go to the lengths that he did to finally marry her. There are stories that they were married before they married in secret.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah. Yeah.
But whether they're true or not, we don't know. But I said that they married in secret before his marriage to Catherine was, annulled.
Yeah. Yeah.
She must have had some hold over him.
Who, Anne Boleyn?
Aye.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I think because she's always portrayed as being so characterful and strong-willed, and obviously an attractive lady, younger than Catherine of Aragon. And I think that just proved irresistible because she was saying no and she didn't want to be his mistress. The only way he could be with her is if he married her. That made her sort of slightly out of reach, and I think it made her more irresistible to him, because that's such a big thing to poor Catherine of Aragon. They'd been married for years. They'd had a quite a happy marriage from what we can tell. Obviously, her not being able to produce a male heir was becoming a big issue, and that was another reason why he was starting to kind of look elsewhere. It's quite sad that marriage ended, because she would have supported him till the end of his days, basically. Catherine of Aragon was really such a loving, strong wife for him. It was very sad how she basically died of a broken heart. I mean, they say that she had cancer, but I think from the stress and the strain of everything that happened, that she couldn't believe that her loving husband would change so much. They believed that she did die of a broken heart.
And she got quite a bit of a raw deal.
Yeah. She really did. Yeah.
After they divorced,
Yeah.
and but again, I think it's just the whole Anne Boleyn thing fascinates me. Always fascinating.
She's the one that stands out all the time out of all of the wives, and we know all of them, don't we? But for some reason, she's the one that stands out. She is portrayed as the feisty one. She's the one that was really interesting and captures people's imaginations, doesn't she?
Mm-hmm. The things that make her stand out for me is, one, as I just says, how Henry pursued her. I don't know who Henry is, but however, how the king pursued her over all that time.
Yeah.
The other thing, there's three things. One, that's the first one. The second one is how she was able to influence Henry. We've seen in his other marriages. A prime example was Jane Seymour. One time that he told Jane Seymour, get on board because you're just my wife and I can get rid of you. She was starting to speak out a wee bit about some of the things Henry was doing, and Henry kind of put her in her place. Even though he loved her, he says, "Don't you forget, I'm the king, and I can get you. What's to that effect? I can get rid of you like that." But the way that he listened to Anne, and then the third thing is the amount of trouble, the amount of conspiring that went into getting rid of her.
Yeah.
She was seen as a threat to the Privy Council because he was this woman now.
Yeah.
Wolsey was gone. He was dead.
Thomas Cromwell had taken over. He despised Anne. Absolutely. They despised each other. So he was never going to be on her side. And he was in favour of the king. So basically, whatever Thomas Cromwell said, the king would listen to. And obviously then Anne, as much as he'd loved her to start with, couldn't produce that male heir again. She had so many miscarriages. Obviously, she produced Queen Elizabeth I in the end, but that she didn't produce the male heir that Henry VIII wanted. So she was falling out of favour. Not just Thomas Cromwell, other members of the Privy Council were against her and feeding negative information to Henry. And she was overheard saying something about the king dying, which you're instantly held accountable for treason if you were to say that. That was fed back to Henry. And eventually that was to her demise, that she was wicked. I think they actually executed her brother as well. They accused her of having a relationship with her brother because they were so close. It was awful how she was set up, really, because that's how it is from the outsider looking in. She was absolutely set up. She was there to be a loving wife. And it was a bit like, Caesar, really, wasn't it? All the knives in the back. So
that's exactly we still see a console connect. That's true, Eileen. Very true, though. Just to get back to what you're saying, it was they all conspired against her. I mean, you get Henry there. Anne's failed to produce this male heir, so his mind's he needs it. He's desperate. He needs this male heir. You've got the Privy Council, you've got Cromwell who hates her, you've got the Privy Council who hate her and are jealous of her, and they're all, they say, how can we get rid of this woman? So they're feeding Henry, so they came up with the plot of adultery, etc. And so they're feeding Henry. Cromwell played a major part in it.
He absolutely did. Yeah. He did.
They are feeding Henry all these bits and pieces. The thing about talking about the king's death, that was the nail in her coffin. I think it was Henry Norris. She said to because he was always hanging about, and Anne Boleyn was overheard saying to him, "You look to fill dead man's shoes."
Okay.
Talking about if the king dies, you want to take his place with me.
And that's true, isn't it? That was true.
That was the word she used, and this is what sealed her fate. She was overheard saying this. This was related to the king, and that was treason.
Yeah.
Basically, and she was arrested. She was, and as you say about her brother, she was accused of having relations with her brother, with Henry Norris, somebody Brennan. Henry, Mark Smeaton.
Musicians in court, because she was very flirty. She was very vivacious and flirty, so they could try and pin anything on her.
Aye, which they did.
Yeah, terribly sad. Yeah.
So she was arrested, and I think there was 6 others arrested with her. Her father was arrested as well, but he got let off. Her brother, and I think it was Brennan, he got let away as well. The rest were all executed, including her brother.
George.
But the other thing that gets me with the Anne Boleyn case, whatever you want to call it, is the timing of the trial and the execution and the swordsman for Calais. And what historians have said is the time it would have took the swordsman to travel from Calais to London via Dover, and the time between her trial and execution, the swordman had to be ordered before a trial took place, in order for him to arrive on the date that he did.
And Henry wanted the best executioner for her. He wanted to show her mercy, didn't he? And have a swordsman do it rather than, the sort of block or the axe, as it were. So that was supposed to be showing mercy, the way you were executed.
He was either burned at the stake or beheaded. But Henry chose beheading and with
a sword rather than an axe.
The sword.
Because if I'm right in thinking, poor Thomas Cromwell, who also, we'll probably come to that, but he also met his death. It was an axe, I think, wasn't it, used on him, and it took 3 blows to actually behead him. So it was pretty brutal. And they think it takes about 8 seconds for somebody to die when they're beheaded. Richard Felix is a really interesting historian. You've probably seen some of the things he does. And he was talking on one of his lives a couple of months ago about a gentleman who was beheaded, and his head fell upright in front of somebody who happened to be a physician. And this head fell in front of him, and he called his name after 10 seconds, the chap who'd been beheaded, and the eyes opened. And he called his name again after another 10 seconds, and his eyes opened. And he called him the 3rd time, and his eyes didn't open. So it was over 20 seconds of him being beheaded where there was still
He was still conscious.
Conscious brain function, because he opened his eyes when his name was called. That is quite horrifying, isn't it, when you think of that? That's
Well, this is why they say that, after somebody's dead, this is why the executioner holds the head up. So the person who's just been beheaded, basically, some people might say he's nuts, can see. And there are reports that after Anne was beheaded, her eyes were still moving.
And her lips. And
her lips were still moving.
Yeah.
Mary Queen of Scots was said to be still speaking after beheading. Yep. So there's a lot of evidence to show that you don't die instantly.
No.
Beheading.
Awful.
There is that, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 second. I suppose there's different cases, but there is that small period of time where you're still conscious. You can still hear, see, possibly speak. Don't know.
Terrible. Terrible thought, isn't it, really?
But the Eileen says there's brutal. It was brutal. I mean, they say that Henry was responsible for over 72,000 executions.
That's shocking. And what we haven't mentioned, obviously, with the Reformation and when he became head of the church, all of the monasteries, the dissolution of the monasteries, and he offered for the monks to either surrender or they were executed. I mean, it was on such a massive scale as well. It was just horrific. A lot of the artifacts were sold to give money to the palace. A lot of the books, a lot of the Bibles were burnt. I mean, it was just shocking. And of course, that caused a lot of hate, because there were a lot of, real practicing Catholics in England at the time. So, a lot of them went into hiding. A lot of them were found and executed if they refused to give up their faith. It was just a shocking and brutal time with that one act of, leaving. So the Pope wasn't the head of the church. The King became the head of the church. It just changed everything. And I think that's why we remember Henry VIII so well, isn't it? Not only with the 6 wives, but the brutality, the breaking away from the Catholic Church. So like you said at the beginning, there are so many big things that he did that kind of, we're just so fascinated by. But it's just the brutality of it that makes it kind of stick in our mind, really, isn't it?
It does. I mean, as you just says, the things he did. There's so many things that this guy did during his reign, and he's still big today, basically. Pardon the pun. With the dissolution of the monasteries, and then came the oath. The oath. My speaking's on fire the night. The oath. The oath that people were, told to sign, basically sign or be executed. Thomas More.
Yeah.
Hey, Kate Doll. I'm doing good. Hope you're doing well.
Hello, Kate.
That's Kate Frazee from.
I remember Kate
Chicago.
From last time, actually. Yeah. Hi, Kate.
Chicago.
Okay.
And then came the oath that had to be signed.
Yeah.
And Thomas More, who was a humanist, is that the word?
Okay.
He was a very, very religious, but he'd known Henry since childhood, and he tutored Henry, in most of his life and what have you. And he was a very, very close friend of Henry, but he refused to sign this oath.
Okay.
And so he was arrested and put in the tower, basically. All his family told him, look, basically, it's just a bit of paper. Just sign it. It'll spare your life. But he refused. No, I'm not signing it. And he ended up, Henry executed him. And this was a guy that he'd known since childhood, basically. And been a close friend for many, many years. And was part of the Henry's court as well. And he was beheaded. His own daughter, Mary Tudor, even, it's rude. I don't know if this is 100% true, but it is said that his own daughter, not directly by Henry, by one of Henry's, advisors, whatever, basically says to Mary, look, you need to sign this oath. And we all know that Mary was a very, very strong Catholic.
Yeah.
Which will come to later on. With Bloody Mary. But she she was even told, you don't sign this, you will be executed. But she refused to sign it, and Henry backtracked on it. He says, "Oh no, nothing will ever happen to you. You're my daughter," basically. Because I think for him to have executed his own daughter, that would not have looked well.
No. Family, no.
For his whole image sort of thing. But as we were saying, about Ireland, we saying about brutal times. Do you think? I mean, it is known. I can't remember off the top of my head what year it was, but he had a jousting accident where he had a head injury, and a lot of the records say that he changed after that.
Well, that's quite believable, really, isn't it? Because if you think in this day and age, people now believe that if somebody has a head trauma, it can change their personality. So it absolutely could. And he had lots of injuries. As we know, he had an injury to his legs, one leg in particular, where he got ulcers, and they treated them, in totally the wrong way to how we would treat them in this day and age. And it probably just made them worse and worse. So he was probably a really grumpy king in his later years as well, because he was this big, obese man. He'd made lots of enemies. He'd beheaded so many people. He'd been through so many wives. He had all of these medical ailments to deal with, which was dealt with, as I say, by bleeding his legs and poking and pricking his legs, which is probably the worst possible thing to do. So he must have been in so much pain, physical pain, and then the stress of not being able to produce this male heir. He probably did change. I should imagine his personality changed totally. But we're talking about the jousting. I mean, he used to do all of these athletic type things and jousting, and a lot of that was really to practice for fighting in battles and in wars. And he was well known for gathering a really strong navy, Henry VIII, wasn't he? So his leg dressings were said to be, oh yeah, absolutely, Eileen. And I think he absolutely smelt, according to records, that people would have to sort of turn away with a tissue over their nose because of the rotting flesh and the rotting skin. But yeah, the jousting was kind of practice for the fights and battles potentially that they would have. And he built this navy, didn't he? And the Mary Rose, actually, I have a connection to the Mary Rose, because the Mary Rose was one of his warships that sank in 1545, if you remember, and it wasn't rediscovered until 1981. And I remember. Do you remember
when they lifted it?
They were pouring all of the water over it to stop it from decaying. And we went on a school trip. My school, we went on a school trip to go and see it. And of course, when you're young, you don't appreciate the history.
It's just like old wood, basically, isn't it? Your teachers listen to you or that. Okay. Where's the kiosk?
And we had to go back and write an essay about the day and about what we'd seen. And I remember writing this little essay about the Mary Rose. And I actually won a prize. They entered me into a prize, and I won, I think it was something like £3, which back then was quite a bit of fun for writing this story on the Mary Rose. But it was, so that's quite fascinating how he was, all of the things that he did in his younger years. And he was so accomplished as well, wasn't he? Like we said, he was a musician. He could speak so many different languages, including Latin. He was an athlete. He was very physical. He rode horses well, didn't he? He loved dogs. But a lot of that was leading to building armies, which he did, and particularly the navy. So there were so many strings to his bow in such a short lifespan when you think about it, dying at the age of 55. And interestingly, on his deathbed, because nobody could tell the king that he was dying, because of course that was supposed to be treason.
No, you couldn't tell. That was it.
And there's rumours that some of the last words he said were monks, monks, monks. And if you think about it, with what happened with the monasteries and all of the monks that he executed, maybe he was being haunted by monks. But the thing that is written the most is that he said, "Oh, I'm just going to go to sleep now, and I'll think about things when I wake up." And he didn't wake up. That's when he died. So, yeah.
You
So
said
amazing.
1536.
Okay, what was that for, Sarah? I'm sure she'll tell us in a minute. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, what a fascinating life in the 55 years that he had on planet Earth. I mean, the love, the betrayal, the brutality, the wars, the battles, the enemies. Just unbelievable, really, wasn't it? When you think
It
about
was.
it. That's why we're fascinated by him still, and we still talk about him now.
At 1536 was his Bay was his jousting accident.
Okay.
So he would have been 36 plus 9. He would have been 45.
Yeah, and by that time he was already a massive bloke, wasn't he? So that wasn't going to help his health in general, was it? Really?
40. I think my maths is right. I think it's 45. He would have been when the jousting accident. But just back to the Navy. He was a big Navy. He wanted. Pardon me, he wanted the biggest navy in the world, basically, and he spent, I don't know, thousands and thousands, whatever the amount was, on building ships. He just wanted more ships and ships, and this was a major thing. You see, the Mary Rose, unfortunately, I think it was Plymouth.
Yeah, Plymouth. I think so. I think so.
That was a sort of flagship, that was pride and joy. Unfortunately, it was sunk. But as you see, he passed away 55. Do you think there was a time in his life? I mean, obviously, he had his own personal demons. As you said, Tracey, he went through 6 wives. He did have a male heir who sadly passed away. He had one male heir. But obviously, he passed away after Henry did. But he went through 6 wives. He lost so many children, and his entire court basically had been up and down for decades. He had all these illnesses. And do you think there was ever a time when he just sat down and thought, I've had enough?
Yeah, I think so. And I think obviously he'd probably got to that stage when he passed because of everything that had happened. His health was failing him. People had betrayed him. He had failed in so many ways, if you think about it. So probably when he did pass, he was probably ready to go. And in fact, 55 to us sounds very young, doesn't it? But back then it wasn't necessarily that young, was it? So
no, it was. Well, if you think about it, that was the 1500s. You get 1600s. The average lifespan was considered between 30 and 35.
Yeah,
that was the 1600s.
Yeah,
so I would imagine it would be somewhat. And let's face it, there was no kind of hygiene back then either. No sanitation, nothing like that. So the mortality rate would have been totally different. The death, with so many diseases running out.
He was paranoid about that as well. This is what I'm saying about his 60 homes and palaces. He would travel between them to get away from any areas that had diseases of any sort. But he also covered it up by saying, I'm going to this area to connect with my people. So he'd go to that particular area, wherever it might be, to kind of relate to those people, to his subjects. And then he would go to another area. But he was absolutely paranoid about catching a disease or an illness of some sort.
He
never really did he? He just suffered terribly with the ulcers on his legs.
That's it. He never really, no doubt he had illnesses, during his lifetime, but disease-wise, the health issues he suffered from were kind of self-inflicted. Jousting accident, head injury, accident, and this probably led to different kind of infections. As you said, in his island says his dressings were putrid. People couldn't stand the smell. Because his system would have been rotten, basically.
Yeah, terrible. Absolutely.
And they'd no way of actually treating it, And, as you made a good point, with his doctors, I would hated to have been his doctors. Because you couldn't tell the guy, it's only a matter of time.
No, I know. Yeah.
Because then you would end up on the scaffold.
Yeah.
If you told the king, you've only got days to live, Your Majesty, that was it. You were for the chop.
Absolutely.
And I think that I'm watching the time for you, daughter. I know you're up early in the morning.
That's all right.
Don't want you sleeping in or, anything like that.
It's my day job.
But I think this is why he made such an impact, because there was so much crammed into this short period of time.
And
I
know we're not going to talk about his wives particularly tonight, but obviously we'll just quickly summarise them. So Catherine of Aragon, obviously he divorced her and she died. Anne Boleyn, as we know, was beheaded. Jane Seymour, as I say, was his one true love, and she sadly died soon after childbirth, and he was actually buried with her. Anne of Cleves, he called her the Flanders mare. She was from Germany. He decided to spare her life because he wanted to keep good relationships with Germany. So he didn't behead her. He just, sent her into exile. Then Catherine Howard was very young and innocent and naive and was beheaded, sadly. And then Catherine Parr, as we know, survived him. Then when Henry died, she married her true love, which was Thomas Seymour. So that's just a quick summary of his wives. So, we're talking about his whole life. He went through all of those wives, which I think we'll probably talk about in another session, won't we? But he certainly lived a life. He certainly had a colourful life, didn't he? It must have been
There's so much history in the development. There is, and a lot of it's kind of forgotten. Just uses summarising his wives and how their ties to Henry ended, basically. And again, go back to Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn, as you say, Catherine of Aragon, divorced, she passed away. Jane Seymour passed away, childbirth. Anne of Cleves, nothing, basically. She was exiled.
They annulled the marriage, didn't they, basically, because he just was disapproving of her. Catherine
Howard, she dug her own grave, basically, and Catherine Parr survived her. But Anne Boleyn, it's just, that's what I was saying earlier on, the amount of trouble these guys went to get rid of her.
I know.
It shows you, I think that's the other reason she sticks out so much. It shows you, I mean, these were guys weren't stupid. They were all, noblemen and dukes, earls, whatever you called them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for them to feel threatened by a woman.
Yeah.
All right, she was a queen, but for them to feel threatened by this one woman, to go to that much trouble to create this, because I think, I do believe, and I think it dawned in Henry after she was executed that she was actually innocent.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing it portrayed in films and TV, that Henry did actually realise, look, that, she was innocent, what have I done? Whether he regretted it or not, who knows, because he'd moved on by then, he didn't waste much time and get married to Jane Seymour.
No, exactly. He truly did fall for her, didn't he? And I just wanted to say, I think that was one of the downfalls, or the start of the downfall for Thomas Cromwell was Anne of Cleves, because this was the German lady that he was shown a portrait of, and Thomas Cromwell said, she's a fine-looking woman, and as soon as Henry met her, he found her quite despicable and really didn't like her and nicknamed her the Flanders mare. So Thomas Cromwell had a bit of a nail in his coffin for that, because Henry blamed him for setting him up with that marriage, thinking he was going into quite a nice marriage with a good German woman, and they didn't find each other attractive at all. I think she was repelled by him and he was repelled by her. So that was kind of the start of the demise of Thomas Cromwell as well.
That's it. It would only take one little thing. I mean, that's not a little thing, but it would only take one thing. And I think this is why a lot of people walked on eggshells in Henry's court.
It must have
daily.
been so difficult, wasn't it?
Can you imagine living with that? But
I know. It was terrible times, wasn't it, really? Terrible times. Because people would have thought, you're so privileged to be part of the court, or to be a nobleman, but you weren't, because you were always at threat. If the king changed his mind or had a bad day or changed his mood, you didn't know where you stood. So it must have been quite frightening times, really. And that's what I think. He started off as a really popular king and a popular leader, and then people soon got to know the brutality and how he was manipulated by his Privy Council, and then everybody started to fear him, and nobody trusted anybody. Because they were all corrupt. They were all talking. They were all trying to, keep themselves safe. So, it must have been a stressful place to be honest, mustn't it?
Everybody was whispering in the corners and the rest of it. Usually with Thomas Cromwell, he was a close advisor to the king. But there is a famous quote that Henry's meant to have said to his Privy Council after that. He says, I have not been well handled. he was not happy at all.
No.
I think there was other things involved because the sort of the royal purse, whatever you call it, was empty basically. So he was skint, you know. And so there was a lot of things, but that started the ball rolling for Cromwell. And there was quite a few people hated him, and they would have stoked the fire a wee bit as well.
Oh, absolutely. He wasn't popular at all. Anybody who was in the king's favour in the Privy Council were at threat of the others because they were. It was the jealousies, wasn't it?
Aye, you were a target basically, you know. And
absolutely, you were. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank God we live in civilised times.
Wow. We think we do. We hope we do.
We think we do. Aye, well, we think we do, though. We certainly think we do.
Compared to that, then, I think we are quite lucky, to be honest.
But no, see, this is. I've always been fascinated with the Tudors.
I love the Tudors. So many of my friends love the Tudors as well. You know, I quite often have conversations with my friends that really are passionate about the Tudors. My mum is as well, so it's passed down from my mum because she always was fascinated by it. And I think you become more interested in history as you get older, don't you? Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's when you're younger and you do history at school, it's like, yeah, whatever. But as you get older, there's just this fascination, and particularly, as we've said, for the reasons, you know, about Henry VIII, he draws you in. Even the 6 wives of Henry VIII, they all have their different stories. They all draw you in. And Anne Boleyn is the one that will always stand out, isn't she? She's the one that every woman would like to think she would have been her, not for the fact that she would be beheaded, but the fact that she was the feisty, the outspoken one, the one that flirted with everybody. I think women relate to Anne Boleyn the most out of all of the wives.
She was
fascinating, absolutely fascinating period in time, and one that will always be talked about, I'm sure.
And we've quite a lot more talking to do with it in the week to come, or whatever you want to call it. But well, I think we'll wind it up there, Doc. We did say an hour 15. So I know you need to get to your bed and whatnot, you know.
I do. Early start.
Well, I'll keep a hold of you just a wee couple of seconds after we come off. So where can people find you?
So probably in your friends list is the best thing. So I'm Tarot Tracey. So if they find you I'm one of your friends in Paranormal in History, aren't I, and on your other page. So if they find my name there, that can link them into me, because I don't have my own sort of website or anything. I'm just purely on Facebook, known as Tarot Tracey. Or you can send me a Facebook message and I will find that and I'll be able to link you into my page. Because obviously, I do tarot card readings. I lead meditations. I lead a circle. There's lots of things I do, but I didn't want to talk about that tonight because we really wanted to talk about the Tudors, because there's so much to talk about, isn't there? But people can find me from your page if they're interested in what I do.
We can get, you know, we also we're getting you back, but you know, we can do a show one night for a nominal fee. To talk about yourself, basically. Maybe we'll talk about yourself.
I don't like talking about myself. I'd much rather talk about the Tudors.
No, what you do. I'm not talking about your personal life. I'm talking about you, what you do, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Professionally, you know what I mean?
Well, if people find my Facebook page, they can see what I do. If they're interested, you know, they can have a little look.
Excellent, Doc. So I'll keep a hold of you just after we come off for a wee second or two. Okay. So that's it for tonight. Thanks to Tracey for joining us. We hope you enjoyed that wee chat about one of Britain's most famous monarchs, old Henry VIII. We will be covering more in the Tudors time to come. You tell them we've not done a show for about a month. You tell them well out of practice.
No, you've done well.
We're back on Tuesday with the Occult family. Ooh. For a wee first time meeting them. So that should be quite interesting. So a major thanks to Tracey for coming in, and hopefully we'll see you on Tuesday. So talk to you later, folks. All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.